there is sometimes misconceptions about the quality of LiDAR data. I've had people say to me, LiDAR data is not great. And it's because of, we have to imagine the history over time of where things were and where they're going. And historically,
did you know that LiDAR technology can map the entire surface of Earth in just 3 hours? Yes, you heard that right. In just 3 hours. Today, we're diving into the world of LiDAR and its groundbreaking impact on civil engineering and project proposals with Rebecca Swabey, P.Eng, a professional engineer turned tech startup founder, and discover how this game-changing technology is reshaping the way engineers tackle challenges and plan for the future. I'm your host, James Taylor, and this is the Civil Engineering Podcast, the first podcast dedicated to helping civil engineering professionals succeed in work and life. Let's jump into today's episode. It's now time for our civil engineering conversation of the week with Rebecca Swabey. Rebecca, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Rebecca, can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your career journey from working in civil consulting to founding Equator Studios?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So even before I started in consulting, before I even picked a university program, I wasn't sure coming out of high school what I wanted to do. And I'm not one of those people that can do a lot of research and reading and understand exactly what, things are going to look like if I make a certain decision. I like to just try things out by doing it, kind of like a baby, putting things in their mouth to learn. So I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I ended up taking a year off and doing a volunteer program for 9 months called Vegetation up in Canada. So you get to test out different jobs and see what kind of work that you like. And through that, I met an environmental engineer. And that was really just the spark. He told me what he did, and I was like, that sounds cool. I signed up, and sort of the rest is history. I ended up coming out of school working for a large consulting company in Canada. I was doing municipal infrastructure design, so a lot of work to support land development, a lot of hydrology studies, stormwater management plans, and so on. And then I ended up making a switch to a smaller company. It was almost like an engineering consultant startup. And they did some really cool work around creek restoration and renaturalization. So I learned a ton. But what's cool is I landed in Waterloo in Canada, which is a bit of a tech ecosystem. And you might have heard of some of the companies that have come out of here, BlackBerry, for example. So there's just a lot of tech in the area, a lot of opportunities to get involved and to learn about tech startups, for example. So my co-founder and I just ended up at a hackathon. We went out because there was free pizza. We learned about how to start a tech company and kind of just went from there.
So what motivated you to transition from working at these private consulting companies to founding this tech startup? I know you talked a little bit about, these different opportunities you had, but, it takes a lot more than just seeing other people doing that to really jump in to those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of two things were happening in parallel. One was, as I already said, just being in a community where there was a lot of emphasis on tech and getting started and a lot of support for that. But the other part was just looking back at the time that I was working in consulting and realizing with a new lens some of the problems that I was experiencing firsthand. I'll give you an example. I did a lot of hydrology studies, as I said. So finding great topographic data and maps was always a challenge. And in the large organization I worked at, there was actually a process that involved, going through a dedicated GIS staff member to get it. And so you put in the request, you wait a couple of weeks, the data comes back, you do your work. And personally, I found that a little bit frustrating because I like to do all the different parts of the job. And I thought, it would be really cool if I could get my hands on this data too. I also learned about how challenging it is to get really high resolution elevation data too. In some cases, the GIS person at my company was putting in requests and mailing hard drives for the information. So it was a big hassle and a long wait. And that's really where we got the idea. We ended up creating a platform to centralize trusted sources for high resolution elevation data. So LiDAR point clouds, bringing it into one central, easy to use platform that anyone can use.
I love that. I know for myself, similar background to you of doing, those municipal engineering, working on land development plans and those types of things. And, you're always, when you start off a project, you're always trying to find what information is available to help me be able to either scope that project or make sure that I'm not missing something before you even get started. And that data that's available, you're looking all over the place sometimes for those different things. And some jurisdictions have a better quality than others and all those different nuances. And it's like, well, if only I had this. And it sounds that similarly, you had a similar frustration.
And as a consultant, you're working in so many different places. So all these different systems that you have to access and navigate. And sometimes it's really easy, but other times, like I said, you're literally mailing a hard drive.
Yeah. So why do you believe it's important to democratize access to data like the LiDAR and GIS for civil engineers?
Okay, it's so important. I mean, the immediate example that I already highlighted is really around the efficiency piece. So just being able to do your job a lot quicker and more effectively when everyone at the organization has immediate access to the data they need to do their work. But beyond that, through creating this platform, we actually had the opportunity to speak to like hundreds of users of the platform. And it's amazing to see all the use cases beyond even professional use cases. So we have, for example, landowners in Texas that are renaturalizing old ranch land. And they're just doing this because they're interested and they want to redevelop, this property that they own. We have hobbyists that are making maps and selling their artwork. Another professional example, we have an archaeologist who's she's using the LiDAR data to identify where First Nations people used to live in Florida. Wow. They're looking for, I didn't know of this before, but it's something called a shell midden. It's almost like a kitchen where old shells and bones from where people were eating and sharing meals were deposited. And you can actually see it in the LiDAR. It's amazing. You look along the coast and you can see these unnatural shapes where these materials are just deposited. So she used to have to work with a specialist to find this information, but now she can just go in and, hunt for it right in the data herself, which is very cool.
As that's really interesting. And it's really cool to see the different types of ways LiDAR and GIS data is being utilized. I think, we think about it one way, but great examples of different ways that it's being utilized for other purposes across the U.S. and I'm sure across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just say, a lot of the information in Canada and the U.S. around the world, there's usually a primary objective or funding source for it to be created. So here in Ontario, it might support important flood mapping work that they're doing. So that's sort of the lens. But then there's so many other secondary benefits to having the information. And so that's just really important. What I want to stress is that there's so many different people using this data. It's really amazing.
It's going to sound a little bit of a weird question, but is there a specific type of data that you like the most? Is there anything in particular that you're I'm really interested in this aspect of it? Or is it kind of just, hey, data in general?
Oh, well, I'm obsessed with looking at the LiDAR point clouds.
Yeah.
I just think that it is so cool to be able to see that level of detail, especially when you get into how it's visualized and tweaking and tuning the gradient so you can actually read it. Of course, going to site is really important and seeing things with your own eyes. But when you're on site, you're almost limited by, what extent you can see. But looking at the LiDAR data, you can see things so clearly. It's almost like an X-ray. And, I myself, when I hear these stories about archaeologists and we've had people looking for gold, it's really cool. I'm like, wow. I got to go look around and see if I can find some cool things.
Yeah, find some gold,
too.
Right?
Yeah.
That'd be fun to do. Exactly. Yeah. I talked a little bit about it, my experience and the importance of having things, or the way that I found having things up front of project. But can you explain a little bit about having good data earlier in the project process can save time, save rework, reduce stress for civil engineers that are working with this on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, and one thing I want to say before you get into that is there is sometimes misconceptions about the quality of LiDAR data. I've had people say to me, LiDAR data is not great. And it's because of, we have to imagine the history over time of where things were and where they're going. And historically, the LiDAR data has been processed into derivative products to make it easy to share online because these files are massive. We're talking about, in the U.S., the 3DAP program, they have airborne LiDAR surveys flying over massive geographies. And then this information needs to be shared online. So historically, it was chunked into tiles And the resolution from the point cloud, which is the highest resolution, it's turned into, a lower resolution to make it easy to share online. So it could be 2 meter DEM, for example, DEM, or 5 meter, or whatever the case may be. So sometimes when people think about LiDAR, their mind just goes to these derivative products or old products from 10 years ago when the sensor quality was, not as good as it is today.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what I want to say about that is that there is data out there from government sources that is available to you right now. It's free. You can go find it. And some of this data is accurate to a couple of centimeters, 3 centimeters, 10 centimeters. Like, it's really amazing. I remember doing GPS surveys out in the field, and it sort of rivals what you would do on the ground with the GPS in some cases. So how does this help save time, add efficiency, avoid rework? The old way might be you win the job, you send out your survey crew, however long that takes to mobilize the crew to get the data back. In the meantime, maybe your designers have started on some concepts. They're looking at they got to give the client something. You got to keep it moving. When you access this high quality elevation data, you can actually get started and do a lot right from the beginning. And so it sort of flips it a little bit. Yeah, you still need to get that survey done. You still need to confirm what's out there. But now it's more of like it's a check rather than like it's supplementing what you already have. And so that means that the first concepts, the first designs that you're working on are a lot closer to where you're going. You minimize, the potential to have to rework things completely. And so, that it's great for the engineers. It's great for the designers. You feel good about what you're producing, and you can really save a ton of time.
Yeah, nothing is worse in a project than you develop a concept and then you go to do the survey and you realize that your concept can't work anymore. Nothing is worse than that. And so having that data available to you, like you said, open source type things as well that you can just go and find are super helpful in setting yourself up so that you're not having issues later on in a project. And that's really the benefit. It sounds like, the survey is really the fine tuning of the LiDAR, but the LiDAR is going to give you a certain accuracy level that you're
definitely
able to utilize.
Definitely going to get you started. Yeah. And I want to say, even before you win the project, this data can be used to inform your proposal. And even before, so we've spoken to companies that work with land developers. They're acquiring land for commercial development, for example. I spoke to somebody last week. I can't go into the specifics, but He basically told me that there was a property listed and there was some information from high-level mapping about what was possible on that site, and the price was set based on that. Now, he was able to go into the LiDAR and realize that, that high-level mapping was not actually telling the full story.
Yeah.
And because of what he learned from the LiDAR, he actually realized that was a lot more valuable than what they were listing it for. So he,
wow.
So that was great. Really cool. They ended up recommending to their client that they go for it. They put together a whole technical plan of how they would approach it, but it's that kind of thing. It's like the secret insights that you get when you have access to great information.
That's really cool. Before we continue, I wanted to jump into just ask a question. So obviously you founded this company, Equator Studios. How did you come up with the name Equator Studios? Just curious.
Oh, it's hard to name a company. There's a lot of companies out there with names already. But, I really liked, we're a mapping company. We started with mapping. So Equator, mapping terminology. And we were really thinking about how to democratize access to information. So thinking about, the widest group of people that we can design the solution for. So thinking about the equator and, it just sort of came to mind.
Love it. That's great. That's cool. That's cool. Can you share an example from your experience, let's say a stormwater pond survey project that illustrates the impact of having better data and tools? I'm sure you've got a lot of experience with this type of thing.
Yeah, I'll share a personal story of a project that's really burned into my memory now because, I used to do a lot of stormwater design work, as I said, but that work spanned from, it wasn't just the design, it was also the field work and the assessments as well too. So I remember one project where we were responsible for quantifying how much sediment was in existing stormwater facilities so that we could make recommendations on, which of the 100 ponds in the city they were going to clean out first, and how much it was going to cost based on how much sediment was in the facility. Now, the RFP had basically said, we want you to do a survey, of course, of the sediment, at the top and the bottom of the sediment, but they also wanted the whole site surveyed to the property limits, effectively. So what that meant practically when we got out there is, we did our survey, our bathymetric survey on the water, our sediment survey, but then when we were doing the extent beyond, it was so challenging. We were fighting through vegetation, like really dense stuff in some cases. And I didn't have the access to the LiDAR data that I do at the time, so I wasn't even aware of it. But we were fighting, for 2 points basically through this vegetation, and it would take a long time. We were getting bug bites, and it was really frustrating. And so if I was to go through that again, the way that you can leverage the LiDAR data, perhaps when you're submitting the proposal, the client might not even necessarily recognize the value of this information. So there's always the opportunity to use it as your competitive advantage and say, hey, the goal of the project is to quantify sediment volumes. We're going to do that. And we can possibly save you a lot of time on the schedule, save you a lot of money if we leverage this existing resource. So yeah, that's what I would do if I was going to go through that process again.
Yeah. So you brought it up. This might be a little bit more technical of a question, but I think I've heard I hear from a lot of civil engineers talking and even developers of, you brought up the misconceptions with LiDAR. LiDAR as it pertains to vegetation and trees. Can you talk a little bit about, is it accurate? Is it not accurate? Does it depend on the season? Just talk a little bit about that, because I think there's a potentially misconception that when you have vegetation, LiDAR is not good in that area. But I think it really depends on a lot of other factors. Yeah,
exactly. And what I want to stress there is it's really important to dive deep into the metadata. So every survey that you get from, trusted government sources, they're going to have a whole report about what was requested, what was delivered, all of the checks that they've done. And there's information about the accuracy when it comes to non-vegetated conditions as well as vegetated conditions, so that you're going to have two different sets of values around that. The other thing is timing around when the survey was collected. So as you said, you can actually figure out, was this collected when the leaves were off the trees versus when, sometimes you do actually want to capture that canopy information.
Right.
So there's a good reason to do it. In the case of the stormwater ponds, I'm talking about wetland vegetation effectively. So survey having been conducted at a certain time of year, there actually is pretty good access to the ground surface. And so it would have been really helpful. But yeah, what I want to stress is that you got to dig deep into those reports. You got to learn about the data that you're using, and then that will inform, your decision as to how you use it for your project.
I think that's great, because I think a default could be, hey, this data is available, I'm going to utilize it. Right. And what you're saying is, don't just use the data, understand the data. Understand when it was collected, all the details related to it, because the data is good, but you need to know the background behind it.
Yeah. And what's really cool too is sometimes the accuracy comes back when it's going through the quality control process after it's been collected. It will actually come back more accurate than what was requested. So you could actually say, okay, it said it was in this QL1 band, quality level 1. But then when you look at it, it might actually be more accurate in some places than that. So that was really cool to see too.
That's awesome. How did your company identify the biggest pain points in the industry, particularly as it related to proposals and RFQ responses?
Okay, yeah. So we started with mapping, but through the creation of the Equator platform, we got to speak to a lot of folks in the industry. And one thing that kept coming up over and over again was proposals. I myself had worked on proposals when I was working for a consulting firm, so I knew how painful it could be. You're trying to get your work done, but then this opportunity that you're really excited about comes up. You want to do a great job. You find yourself working on the weekend. You find yourself really, struggling to balance both of those worlds. And so we were hearing that from our user base too, and we thought, okay, let's go one step further. We start just cold calling into organizations. So we got a list of phone numbers. We just called them. We said, out of 10, how important are proposals to your business? 10, 10, 10, of course. That's how you get work. But then when we started to ask about cost and time, what we learned is how expensive some of these responses can be to put together.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands. I think we heard into the like over $1 million for some really big ones, design build jobs, which actually that really blew my mind. So that was shocking. And especially when it comes to responses that require input from many different people on the team.
Yeah.
It can be really challenging to not only get the information that you need from the subject matter experts, but to reconcile that into a story that is going to actually help you win the job. So so that was really, really interesting to learn about how painful proposals were.
So you've talked about it a little bit, and proposals are that perfect storm of overlapping problems. You talked a little bit about, getting multiple disciplines involved or multiple people involved, RFPs maybe not being written the way that the client necessarily wants them, and, assumptions, different things. Can you highlight some of the specific challenges civil engineering firms face during the process?
Yeah, I mean, if you zoom out to like the macro level, you think about our industry, there's a lot of conditions that are overlapping to create the perfect storm, as you said. So, there are trillions of dollars of backlogged infrastructure and housing projects in the U.S.
Yep,
that's a massive.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. At the same time, there is a shortage of qualified civil engineers, and every time that we're pulling in engineers, technical staff that are on project work, it takes away from the ability to actually complete and get those projects done. It could it's a 2-year timeline for some of these projects or more, and losing a week, not only losing a week, but getting distracted and pulled in all these directions, you can really lose momentum. So that's one factor. But then when you look at the micro level, a lot of the engineers that we spoke to didn't necessarily want to be working on proposals. It's sales work that,
right.
I love it. And I know a lot of people do, but others might prefer to just be working on projects.
Yep. It's the difference, right, between the technical aspect and the business aspect of engineering. And you go through school and you learn all of the technical stuff, and some people really like that, and some people really like to transition from the technical into some of more the business aspects.
Exactly, but it's so much of a team effort. You need to get those insights too. Yes. It can be challenging. And then the third thing is really the potential risk to losing out on billable time. Like for the company is, they're making an investment to win the job, but in some cases, especially when it's competitive, the time that it takes you to respond, it can cut into the margins on the actual project, take away from your ability to bill at 100% with your technical folks. So, a lot of things going on there.
I'm here with Rebecca Swabey of Equator Studios, and we're talking a lot about some great things with engineering right now and proposals. How can civil engineering firms rethink the proposal process to create framework that helps staff increase knowledge, quality, and probably one of the most important pieces for the business is the efficiency with it?
Yeah. And we spoke a little bit about the perfect storm, like all the problems that come up. I just want to list a few problems associated with the proposal scramble, as I've heard a lot of people call it. The risk is really around inconsistency, putting out proposals that don't necessarily match with what another PM, for example, might be putting out. The experienced professionals at companies are working on proposals. They're going off of memory. And so they're just saying, okay, I did a couple proposals before. I did these jobs. Go pull them. Let's use those for this current one. They just know. But that can be really challenging when you are a junior young person in the organization and you've been called in to help. Like, it's sort of like a bottleneck to the information, is you got to go ask somebody. Otherwise, you're just digging through project folders, looking for blurbs, that sort of thing. And then I guess the opportunity, when I speak to people that have spent their whole careers in business development, marketing, studying what makes a killer proposal, they tell me a lot about methodologies and frameworks that can really help you win. So how to tell a strong story and how to pull out the right information to create that narrative from not just the marketing people, but from the technical staff too. I spoke to one leader and she was telling me she was going on a road show and basically training the technical staff on how to write stronger narratives in their proposal. So that's the opportunity. So what I want to say is, like, in a perfect world, what it looks like is the ability to have access to all the information that you need to inform your process immediately. So going back to that democratization point, not just internal, of course, like it would be amazing to access and search all past proposals, all past projects from your company. But I'm also talking about external. I'm talking about mapping. I'm talking about regulations, design standards. We're working for so many different clients. Like, it can be a challenge just to find out what are the regulations in different jurisdictions. So that information, automating. So going back to the perfect world, automating tasks that are repetitive, that we don't actually want to be wasting time doing. So like, as I said, searching through file folders. And then what's really important is amplifying what our marketing leaders, our technical leaders know and are doing. So that roadshow I was talking about, like imagine having almost like a co-pilot sitting next to you, a coach sitting next to you that is helping you improve how you write. So say, you've written this technical work plan in this way, but let's try to position this a little bit in a way that's really meaningful for this client. So that's what we're trying to solve right now. And we're building like the next phase of Equator Studios is really focusing on solving the pain points in the proposal workflow process and creating that perfect world scenario.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that's out there. But as far as it comes to civil consulting firms, what's your vision for the future of work, particularly in terms of integrating technology and improving efficiency?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I mean, I didn't really get into the how of how we're creating this perfect world solution, but I'll just say we're leveraging AI, LLMs, LiDAR, like various, cutting edge technology. But I'm actually less, of course, those pieces of the puzzle are really important. But personally, I'm equally, if not more, excited about the people side. And I've learned so much in the startup world. Being a startup founder, I've really had the opportunity to create the company in exactly the way that I'd like.
Yeah.
And what I found really cool is I ended up hiring a lot of people that were a lot younger than me. So, they were just starting their career in software engineering or whatever it is. And I've been so inspired by seeing the generation below come in with all of these ideas, all of this energy. They want to learn, they want to try things, they want autonomy and ownership. And, I wouldn't say I did this intentionally. As a startup leader, you're very busy. So as a result, they just had a lot of ownership over their work and they've really thrived. And because of that, I think we've been really successful because we've had a team of people that just really cares about innovation and building great things. And they have a lot of ownership and autonomy. Of course, you get the guidance at the right time from the leaders, but we've been able to keep them really engaged. And so I think as technology automates a lot of the repetitive tasks and supports our work in all these really important ways, what's going to be extremely important is how quickly your team learns, upskills, and stays engaged with the content. In the civil engineering world, we talk about the leaky pipeline. We lose a lot of people, especially early on in their careers. So that's what I imagine for the future of work, is just creating this workforce that is really engaged and empowered to do good work and learn along the way.
I think you said an important thing there. And as you hear more and more about, AI and technology, there's always the concern of, will there be, what's the place for engineers in the future? Like, can AI replace engineers? And I think the piece that you keyed on there is AI is the assistant. It assists. It's not there to replace, and it gets rid of those repetitive tasks. Engineers are still going to have a huge place in society for the rest of the world, right? I mean, it can't go away because there's still going to be the pieces that need to be there, but the technology is there to assist, not replace.
To assist, exactly. And I'll just give you an example. So the proposal software that we're currently building and excited to launch soon, the first version of it, we thought, you know what? We could probably just ingest an RFP, ingest some old proposals, spit out a good draft. Guess what? Didn't work that well.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
But we tried. You got to try these things first. So what we're doing now is it's really just exposing the information to the people working on it so that they can make the decisions. And that's not just suggestions. It's like referencing. I was talking about metadata before, like where did this data come from? It's the same when we're using these solutions. Like if somebody has presented a possible answer, there's no information about where it came from. It's not really easy to like cross-check that regulation or, that approach. Like it's a non-starter. Nobody's going to use it. So I agree with you 100%. Yeah.
So we're wrapping up here. It's been a great conversation. And Rebecca, I appreciate all the knowledge you've been sharing with us. But what final piece of advice can you share with engineers listening who are looking to innovate and make a significant impact in their field?
Okay. I actually was talking to a business development leader the other day, and they were telling me how important it is to consult with your client when preparing a proposal. And that really solidified a lot of concepts to me around this question that you're asking too, which is my advice is that you should consult early, often, all the time in your career. That's not just with your clients, that's with your manager, that's with your coworkers, especially if you're trying to do something and innovate. It's not just, what do you want to do at work? How is work going to be better for you?
Right.
If you can figure out through consultations with the people that you work with, like what matters to them, what's a win for them, and then you can find a way to position, your idea or your agenda within the context and umbrella of something that also matters to your organization and your boss. Like that's really powerful. I don't know if you watch The Office.
Oh, huge Office fan. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
yes.
What's funny? I find myself thinking back on Michael Scott a lot and thinking about, his advice in whole new ways. He had a lot of good advice in there, as crazy as it is. And there is one episode where he's talking about compromise. He's talking about win-loss and win-win-win. And so this is just another way of illustrating that point. Just always look for a way that you win, your companies win, your coworkers win. That's when you could be most successful. Avoid, the black box. You're thinking about how to solve this thing all by yourself. And I think you'll do great.
I love it. And that's a great way to wrap this up is find ways to win.
And we win too, because, we talked about it on the podcast.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah. You can refer back to Rebecca and say that this was her idea and remember it from now on. So that's great. All right. Now it's time for our CE Hot Seat segment of the week with Rebecca Swabey. All right. Welcome to the CE Hot Seat. You ready to go?
Yes. Thanks.
All right, Rebecca, do you have any specific rituals that you practice every day? For example, do you have a specific morning ritual, lunchtime ritual, things that you do consistently that contribute to you being a successful professional?
Okay, I have nothing that I always do because I find, things change so much month to month, quarter to quarter. But what I will say is that the morning walk has really made like a massive difference on my day. Sometimes I have a lot of energy and ideas flowing, and I'm actually able to just sort of think through a lot of problems before I even get to work, which is amazing. Other days I might feel overwhelmed, and I use the morning walk more like meditation, and it's just a matter of, paying attention to what's around you and just, calming yourself down before the day starts. So yeah, that's been really important. It's getting outside in the morning.
What is one book you recommend to engineers regularly, or just one book that you found to be extremely helpful in your professional and or personal development?
Okay, I'll just mention the book I read most recently, and it's not necessarily specific to engineers or engineering. It's a book by a life coach called Martha Beck, and it's called Steering by Starlight, and it's all about figuring out what is your North Star. I know personally there's been times when I felt stuck or I wasn't sure exactly what I was doing in my career, and this book, it really just takes you through processes for how to ask yourself different questions and figure out, what's really important to you and how to go get those things. So yeah, I would highly recommend.
Thinking back on your managers of the past, picture your favorite manager or managers. What was it that made them your favorite?
Okay, I'm thinking about my most recent manager before Equator Studios. His name was Jeff. And one major lesson that I learned from him, I was always feeling anxious about making mistakes, and I wanted to do things right. And if a mistake happened, I'd really, beat myself up over it. But he really taught me that, mistakes happen all the time, and it's a matter of how you handle it. He was always very calm, and he just worked through it. And he made me feel very comfortable at sharing, mistakes that I made. And so, it was a team. But I will say, I as I worked through my career, I didn't necessarily have a manager that was necessarily like me. And so I'm still trying to figure out, how to best be a manager myself and what that means for Rebecca. And so, yeah, still on that hunt personally.
I've got one final question. That's the critical civil engineering career elevator advice question. If you got into an elevator with a civil engineering student and had about 30 to 40 seconds with them, what career advice would you share with them?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think it goes back to the piece that I said earlier around consulting and really being curious about the people that you work with, your clients, your coworkers, your managers, really getting to know those people and what motivates them as well too. Because when you have that information, you can figure out how to, do what you want to do within an organization, but then also, create a situation where other people are winning as well too.
Rebecca, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Where can our listeners connect with you?
Okay, well, LinkedIn is great. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there, Rebecca Swabey. You can also go to our company website. It's equatorstudios.com. Those are probably the two best ways to connect with us.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
Please remember, you can find the show notes for this episode at civilengineeringpodcast.com. There you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during the episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all of your civil engineering endeavors.